It has been a long time here at Tech Yes City since we've done a Can Yes Fix It. And what we've got here is where you guys send in the parts and then I do my best via quick and janky methods, mainly Tech Yes loving, to try and fix these parts and give them a new breath of fresh air to make them work again. However, before we do that, we're going to read out the awesome letters that you guys send attached to these PC parts. And as well, we'll quickly check out some of the donations that come in too. And a big thank you to you guys that send these in. And the first one here was a AMD 970 Extreme 4 motherboard, FX motherboard. When I was at a deal hunt locally, someone recognized me and they said, look man, I love your work. So they gave us one of these motherboards with a CPU and RAM installed. And they said that they no longer had a use for it and they'd love to see it be put in a gaming PC and put for some use. So when I get some free time, I will put this in with a gaming PC and I will give that away locally to some unprivileged children because that is something that I love doing. And also lately I've been on this massive thing around here in the studio where I'm cleansing the whole studio, getting rid of a lot of the stuff from 2020 that I picked up and either didn't yet sell or didn't yet use for builds because I want to come into 2021 with a fresh start. And especially when we're doing the upcoming deals hunt very soon, I want to be able to just catalog 2021 as a new year for parts hunting. But next thing we've got here is a really bizarre one because someone else sent in one of these boards. I think we did a wash on it in a previous episode. I'll put the link up here where we washed this motherboard and brought it back to life. It was a really weird one, really a lot of fun. But then someone in the audience has sent out yet another one of these motherboards. So now I've got two of these massive LGA 1366 dual socket motherboards. So it looks like you guys really want to see the dual Xeons being tested in a separate video. So perhaps we can make that happen. Do let us know in the comments section below, however, what graphics card you want to see that tested with mainly. What's a good balance? Are you looking at an RX 570 still? Or perhaps you're looking at something a little bit more powerful, say a 1660 Super, if that's a meta that you guys want to look at, as I'll make sure it happens. Though let's get on to the first letter here, which comes from, they did not leave a name, but I'm guessing judging by the email, their name is Luke. So thank you for sending this in, Luke. And they say, I have sent this R9 290X for Tech Yes repair. It is unusual, so I'll give the best explanation I have. If successful, I would really like for you to send it back. I will try to pay for a round trip. If not, I will include worldwide stamps, or I could send you a few of these PC parts I have and want to send. Either way, thank you. So I may have screwed up the BIOS trying to correct after it did this. I have had it boot to Windows and even play a game with the stripe down the screen. I just cleaned the entire PCB and thermal paste yesterday. This is on the 8th of the 24th, 2020, so 24th of August for the second time. So I do apologize straight away. It has taken me a long time. I think this one came here in October. It was sent from the US, so has taken me a few months to just sometimes I get these parts in, I'm so busy and I put them on the shelf with the Can Yes Fix It shelf. So sorry it's taken me so long to check this out, but on the exposed part of the PCB near the for the double BIOS switch, it prefers being to the left when seated. So this one sounds like it's a really janky graphics card going into it. So we will try some things that we can do here with this graphics card, but ultimately when you've got a stripe down the graphics card itself, that is usually the GPU portion. And that's just basically degradation. And so these things, there's really no coming back from those. Even the heat gun can't get that working again. But we'll check out very soon and take a look what we can do for this GPU if it's at all possible. Maybe even run it through a VGA port, which is something that I've liked to circumvent the traditional display port pipeline there. So that has worked in some graphics cards in the past. So we'll give that a try and then we'll see what the problem is. And then they've sent in an AMD CPU, and this has bent pins. I'm not sure if that's the culprit. I bought a second Mobo thinking that it was the problem. All the RAM should work. It is for you. It is ancient, possibly send CPU back. I'd like to make a home theater PC. Intel CPU is yours. So we're gonna take a look at this broken Ryzen CPU here and this broken GPU very shortly and see what we can do. But on to the next letter here. I mean, and yes, bent pins is definitely going to be the cause of a Ryzen CPU not working, especially if they're not going into the socket right, or the CPU, even if it sits like a millimeter off going in properly, the CPU won't work regardless of the motherboard. That's something I've noticed on Ryzen CPUs, and bent pins can contribute to that not fitting into the socket fully. Anyhow, the next one we've got here is, hey Brian, I hope you're doing well. I am a massive fan of your channel. Keep up the good work. I've got the Gigabyte H55M motherboard that seems to be faulty. I've tested this with a Xeon X3450 and tried to overclock it, but it keeps crashing. When I tried to stress test it, started to smell smoke. Yikes. We're gonna stop right there. Starting to smell smoke on a motherboard is not a good thing, yeah, and turning it off straight away is the recommended course of action. Good job there. I suspect maybe one of the phases of power delivery is inadequate, as the CPU draws 139 watts. Can yes fix it? Kind regards, Michael from New South Wales. So we'll give this motherboard a shot very soon. What I'll try and do with the Gigabyte motherboard is I'll just try putting a standard i7 in there, an i7 860. I think I've got one on hand here, and see if that corrects the problem, because sometimes with these old Gigabyte boards, they just go into this, I don't know what to call it. It's just like this weird phase where the BIOS, it doesn't even matter if you flash the BIOS and reflash it, it just goes into this new league of just not working properly. And I have seen this on 2 Gigabyte Mobos, one being an H55 in the past, and also, actually no, I've seen it on 2 X58 motherboards that have been Gigabyte as well. Generally in this era, I found the Zeus motherboards, sorry, they told me to call it Asus as well. The Asus motherboards have been doing the best out of that era, and that's why they're my top pick if you want to go first gen, whether it be X58 or H55, P55. Anyhow, let's get on to the next letter here. We've got here, this is Brian, aka the Yes Man. Love the channel and the great content you put out. The older hardware builds you do are great. I had these parts sitting around from an old HP desktop handed down from the kids. Recently built a new system for my boy and no longer have use for them. I wanted to donate to your channel as I'm sure you'll put them to good use. So they're talking about this Pegatron board here, and they did tell me that the board did have something going on. And this is funny because this is a Pegatron board, which originally I think was the owner, or it was a split off from Asus. Again, or Asus. It was a split off from the company, and this was the business side of things, as opposed to Asus being the retail side. Nowadays, I think Pegatron may even own ASRock. I haven't researched it enough, but this brand in particular is very interesting. And to have a Pegatron X58 motherboard, even if it doesn't work, is actually something cool that I'd like to hang up on the wall. So we'll put a CPU in this thing and see what the go is. But so far, it looks like the pins aren't bent at all. So that's usually a bad sign. Like, believe it or not, if the board's faulty and the pins aren't bent, you don't have a real good chance of bringing that thing back, unfortunately. But let's get on to the last letter here, because this one's a really big one. It's a huge donation. And like, thank you so much for sending this out. It just does really, like, I love this stuff. And then when I look at the prices on AliExpress and stuff, something like this, a $26.99 V3 is not cheap. And then 128 gigabytes of DDR4 ECC registered is not cheap either. This stuff costs a lot of money, so thank you so much, Alex, for sending this out. But let's get on with the letter here. Hello, Brian. Love your videos and decided to send you some love and care from sunny California. Right after I saw your video on the One and X99 motherboard, I realized that I just ordered a similar motherboard, X99 F8 with 8 DDR4 slots to make my new home NAS server. I had a few Xeon E5 V3 chips lying around, as well as a bunch of ECC DDR4 memory, much more than one person might need for his pet projects. So I decided to share. Memory and CPU are both tested in working condition, though I was not able to make the V3 chip work with this memory at its full speed. It is stuck at 2133, but it is still better than nothing. Now we'll stop quickly there, because that is the biggest complaint on the X99 motherboards from AliExpress, is that if you're using it with cheap memory, you generally just, and the Xeon Turbo locks, you generally can't get higher speeds than 2133. I have seen some BIOS hacks where you can manually set in the memory speeds, but it's so tedious to the point where if something's faulty, you then got to go back and reprogram the whole BIOS just to get that memory speed locked in. It's not as simple as just plugging in the memory speeds, locking them in, and then restarting your computer, and if they fail, reset the BIOS. It's a matter of actually programming a BIOS with those innate memory speeds that you want to go with, and then seeing if they work. So it's a lot harder to unlock the speeds on that. And that's why I don't recommend it generally for most people, because you're just gonna be there for days and days trying to get extra speeds when you've already got quad channel memory on X99, and that's gonna do perfectly fine even at 2133 megahertz. But let's continue. Pairing this memory with the Xeon Platinum 82XX series processor, I was able to make it work at 2933 without any problems. So it even has some potential for future use. So what they're referring to is they got this exact memory and they clocked it on a different board with a different Xeon CPU that had the memory unlock features. And they managed to clock this ECC memory to 2933 megahertz, which is actually really good. That's a good, impressive overclock. And they did it without any problems, so it even has some potential for future use. I would love to know if you've got the exact timings for that. Then perhaps I could try that timing on a X99 board. So anyway, I used an ASRock X99 motherboard for testing since my 1 and Z is still in transit, but I think both memory and CPU will work just fine. Thank you so much, Alex. And we're gonna put this to test. I've got to get an X99 board in again. I'm not gonna be putting this one, definitely not gonna be putting a $26.99 on the $100 AliExpress boards. You need something more high-end for this. I'm just gonna say that straight up, and something that'll handle this. I think this is an 18 core. I think it's an 18 core, 36 threads. So perhaps if I do put this in an X99 board and everything goes according to plan, then maybe I can make this my new old main rig. If you guys wanna see that, do let us know down below in the comments. But without further ado, let's get into the last part here, and the first that we'll put up on the test here today. And this was a GTX 1080 Ti that got given to us on a local deals hunt where the person said their computer completely crapped it, and then they tried a different graphics card and they found out the graphics card was the culprit. So we're gonna see, because it's a 1080 Ti, it's a very big investment, especially in the world of graphics cards in early 2021. We're gonna see what can come out of this thing and see if we can get it to boot. My first gut reaction is if the water cooler has gone, then unfortunately what happens is if the pump goes, the GPU overheats, and that is really bad on a GPU. A lot of CPUs will have safety circuits in protection now, but if a GPU, a lot of the times, even though they've got safety circuits in there to protect them, because they produce generally a lot more heat than a CPU, I find GPUs, they can go out a lot quicker, and I have heard stories from people with all-in-one pumps losing their whole GPU when the pump goes out. So it's one thing to consider when you put an all-in-one on a GPU especially. Do be careful that your risk of losing that because of the tripping not working as good as the tripping on a CPU, there's a greater risk of losing the whole GPU entirely. Anyhow, let's get into testing. If you've got this annoying Windows needs activation message and you want to get rid of it for cheap, then today's video sponsor SCD Keys has you covered. For as little as $14 after you use the coupon code BFTYC, you can get yourself a legit single end user Windows 10 license today. Links in the description below. Did we get that on camera? I think we did. There's your problem right there. I know we should put some fans on the actual graphics card, but whoa, okay. That just turned off the whole system. So there's something shorting out here. We got to turn this off, and there's something shorting here, I think. So the problem we're having now is this GPU unfortunately just completely black screens even after we make it into Windows. So the water cooling must have just been giving it that last breath of room that it needed to survive. And whatever happened to this GPU, I mean, it's just been used so heavily that I don't think it's got any more life left in it. So, I mean, if we press this right here, we can see that it'll just turn off like normally. So this one's a really weird one. We can try baking it a bit later too, which we will do. When you guys sent me these GPUs, I'm pretty sure you just wanted to see me bake them up. So we're gonna get through the rest of these parts, then we're gonna give both these GPUs here a go, because this one here is like, after we've done the Tech Yes Loving and stuff, this one's on the verge of giving out. This one was showing, all I could get out of it was just lines on the Windows boot. Then when it made it to Windows, it just clonked out. So the last hope for these is the heat gun. So this Pegatron board here, we tried different RAM slots, and even a different CPU, and it's just not giving us any signal whatsoever. It just keeps boot looping. It starts up, shuts off, starts up, shuts off. Generally, that is an indication of a board that has something wrong with the power delivery. That's what I find. If the power delivery is actually physically damaged, then that's one of the symptoms you'll get. As well as it could be, of course, a faulty BIOS, which in this case, the BIOS is not modular, so we can't take it out and put it back in. And so far, we're 3 for 3 in terms of failing. This is not how I like to do things, but I guess you guys saw the last Can Yes Fix It, and you were like, look, I'm gonna fix up the Yes Man. Baby, boom! We scored a win here. We got this 3300X back to life, but that's because the Tech Yes method of bending Ryzen pins back never fails. If you guys want to see how I do it, I'll put a link to the video up here, but basically with the Ryzen 3000 series and up, also the 5000 series, the pins are much more sensitive to bends. So do keep that in mind. I found the 1000, 2000 series CPUs, they're got a lot stronger pins on them, so they're harder to break, and I feel like the 1000, 2000 series are also easy to fix too. Bends are very sensitive on these ones, so this one was super sensitive. I think whoever had it tried bending it because the bends became very easy, and you gotta be careful. If you bend it one way and bend it back another, you can risk snapping the pin off. But that's one out of, well, like 3 parts that were tested so far, so I'm feeling kind of good, feeling kind of lucky. We're gonna go in now with this motherboard right here. Let's give it a test. See how we go. So we've got this motherboard working now with an i7-860. It's fine, everything's actually kind of fine in terms of using it, but what I noticed initially when I booted this motherboard up was that the profile beforehand was locked in. It was actually freezing and just doing all sorts of weird jazz. Keep in mind, I don't actually have a proper cooler attached to this CPU, but at 1.4 volt on an H55 motherboard, you have to be very careful. These boards, H55 was never really designed for overclocking in itself. P55 was meant for that with the bigger VRMs and the bigger solutions. So overclocking on an H55, you do have to be very careful, and that's why 1.4 volt, I feel, for this motherboard was just too much in general. So if you want to dial that back to 1.3 volt, go for a lower overclock, maybe even put a fan over the VRM or a top-down cooler, you can get a lot better results out of these motherboards and more stability. Say you go for maybe a 3.8 gigahertz overclock rather than going for the big 4 gigahertz OC, and that these CPUs are capable of doing, just it's a bit too high, I think, with this combo right here. That's at least from memory. So this board looks like it's fine. There's not really anything inherently wrong with it. Just you got to be careful overclocking these H55 boards. So the two GPUs, we tried giving them the heat gun method, give them both 8 minutes. That's my magic formula for bringing some of these GPUs back. But both of these GPUs, I think, and especially this R9 290 here, this has suffered from heavy degradation. I don't think anything you do for it is not gonna do anything for it unless you pretty much replace the GPU. I've seen that before on that one. This one here is still a little bit of a mystery, this 1080 Ti. It gave out a little bit of a signal even when as far as booting into the benchmark, but then completely cut out. So I think something is just seriously wrong with this 1080 Ti too. And that's what happens with GPUs. Again, you take a gamble when you try to fix them, and that's why the heat gun's the last resort method, because I have had, I'd say around about, it's like 10 to 20% success rate with the heat gun. So it does work, but it doesn't work that much. And in this case, these two GPUs, they're just too far gone. We can't bring them back, fellas. But we've got one little more trick surprise for this video up our sleeve, because I went and asked Dadman if we had anything that was sitting around somewhere, and he said that someone sent in an X99 motherboard. So this is just like sometimes it feels like you go through the dips, you go through the bad times, and then you get rewarded and there's light at the end of the tunnel. And that's what this X99 motherboard is. So this board right here, we got it to boot and we got a signal out of it a couple of times, and then sometimes it just doesn't want to boot and gets stuck on a 5.3 error code. So I'm gonna basically, what I'm gonna try and do is in the next couple of days, I'll play around with it because it's a really nice board. It's just, I want to get the most out of it in terms of stability. So at the moment it's just not stable. And I think that's got to do with, perhaps I'll go back and clean the pins again, because I did have to bend a heap of pins back. And I did get the signal out, which was really nice. But of course, we want that stability. So let's move over to conclusion now, where today has been pretty successful. And the Can Yes Fix It, we'll talk about the mechanics involved. And when all's said and done, today's episode has been the typical quota where we got practically half the stuff working. But I was disappointed about those graphics cards. I love bringing the graphics cards back to life. And especially now, graphics cards are more than ever needed. And so the fact that we just couldn't get anything out of them, even the VGA port wouldn't work. That trick is not working because both of them just had DVI only, so they didn't have the support for the older VGA through DVI port, which I think they eliminated that on the GTX 900 era. And before that, the HD 7970, before they brought out the R9 series. Anyhow, these two graphics cards, what you're seeing here is basically a typical thing as well, where GPUs generally, once they're gone, they're hard to bring back. My success rate with graphics cards is very low, and even within that success rate, some of them only last like a couple of minutes and sometimes a couple of hours. But I have had a few graphics cards that have just kept going after we brought them back to life. So that is the most desirable thing, but it's also the most rarest scenario that comes out with graphics cards. Though for motherboards, we did have that H55. That was important to note, that I don't think the motherboard was faulty. I just think it was being worked too hard with a 4-core 8 thread on an H55. So it ended up looking like it was perfectly fine once I reset the BIOS and just let the voltages not sit anywhere near 1.4 volt. Some of the other stuff as well, bending Ryzen pins back and bending motherboard pins back, I'm very comfortable with that sort of stuff. I've had years experience doing that. It's once you get the right tools, toothpick for LGA pins, that's my method. And then I've got this special, like, it's not special, it's a cheap screwdriver, it's just a real thin one. And I've learned to perfect that to get the Ryzen pins bent back pretty easily. I mean, today's pin bending session on that 3300X, that was like actually pretty easy, believe it or not. I have bent one back in the past, and I actually did that one on video. I think I plugged it just before, but that one took me ages. There was one in the past I did where there's so many bent pins, and that one took me ages, and we got there in the end. We got the CPU working. So bent pins isn't a problem, but it may be a little bit of a problem with the X99 board that we had at the end of this episode, where that's giving me out some weird signals, and I really want to get that X99 board working, especially one like the G1 Gaming, where that is a high-end motherboard. And I've got to check if that actually works properly with ECC registered as well, because that's another thing. Some motherboards just don't like ECC registered memory, period. And so that's one thing you got to be careful of. So I've got to spend a little bit more time with that motherboard. It's just getting a little bit late now, and I kind of want to finish off the episode because we've got to also start the used parts hunt of the month very soon. And then we're going to be moving into February, where this month has just been, I got to be honest with you guys, it has been a slow one here at Tech Yes City. I haven't built many PCs. I've just been sort of recouping and clearing out my studio behind the scenes so I can start again. And I don't know what it is about starting with not much. I love, like, this is gonna sound maybe weird, but I like starting with a little and then working that and really microing it hard to build something up. I think that's, for me, I don't know if that's like a theory or a thing, or they call it something, but I love just starting with virtually nothing and trying to do these smart decisions, build something big up that makes it significant. And in ways, people have been asking, where's the $100 flip up challenge? That's coming very soon. I've just been having a bit of a relaxation. I mean, by the way, it's gone very well. All the stuff we did in the previous episode, it's incredible. There's an update on that. And the $100 flip up challenge really represented that, where I kind of want to maybe just buy something, like buy some collectibles or something with that money, and then just start again with another $100, because that was just like the funnest parts of those episodes was starting at the $100. Like once we started to get into the flow, once we're getting into this flow now where we're building up a stack, it's actually getting a lot easier, believe it or not. And that's the sort of like, I guess you like that challenge. And so Can Yes Fix It as well in ways is a challenge too for me to try and get these PC parts to work. And so I guess like lately I've kind of wanted to challenge myself. So going forward into this year, I'm kind of be doing the content that's coming out on the channel is going to be more, I guess, focused on just more challenging stuff, like stuff that I really want to just like utilize the Tech Yes brain here and sort of lay it out on the line. Of course, there will be some new products if they're very important and focused on, especially in relation to the used market, I'll be covering those. But in terms of the new products, I'm going to be laying off new products this year as much as I can and focusing mainly on used and just doing different sort of content for you guys and focusing on the main topics that I think a lot of people have on their minds. And that's something that, because I'm just constantly thinking, even though some of this, you know, even though I might have an RTX 3080 around here and whatnot, and believe it or not, these are things that I love thinking about personally too, and just they're always on my mind. I don't know, maybe there's something about me too, is it's like, sometimes you got to shut your brain off, but for me, it's like this thing's always pinging and firing at all different cylinders. And yeah, anyway, there it is, guys. A little bit more about the man behind the camera, which, you know, you guys can say in the comments, you love talking about this stuff. So I'm going to keep telling you about all the stories. And do let us know though in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button for us. But let us know in the comments, what was your favorite fix of today? Or did you have any tips and tricks of your own that you've been coming into lately that's been working in terms of fixing things? I will say one thing, motherboards in the last 6 months especially, older motherboards have been failing, and I've been having so many more problems than I've ever had with motherboards in the history of the channel. So I think as time goes on, these older motherboards are becoming increasingly the first point of failure besides DDR3 memory. In this case, you might even get some faulty DDR4 memory coming up, because that's been out for, I think, almost 7 years now. DDR4 memory's been out, and that's pretty crazy to think about that. So do let us know in the comments what you guys think though. Love reading your thoughts and opinions as always, just like this question of the day here, which comes from Arun Aravind. And they asked, Brian, can you ship your PC to India? If yes, how much will it cost me? So generally we ship it with courier, and that can cost like over $100 at least. But I think I just checked on the Oz Post, if I'm trying to bring it down cheaper, I think Oz Post, I may be able to post a small PC with them for $90. So if the PC's in a small case, it weighs under 20 kilograms, I'm pretty sure I could get that to you for $90 Aussie, which actually isn't too bad. Believe it or not, I know it's a high price tag for shipping, and it's very high, and it's why traditionally I don't ship PCs internationally. But that's actually come down a lot. It used to be like well over $200 to ship a PC international, where it just was not worth it for anyone. But coming in at $90 for a small PC, I mean, it is doable, especially if your country is got some really insane rip-off prices. But yeah, at the moment, I actually don't have any PCs for sale except for the AliExpress one that we built with the 6-core Xeon, but I haven't even listed that yet. I've just been looking at other stuff that I've been clearing out. So the PC hustle in January has slowed down a little bit, but I'm looking, first of all, to solve the graphics card problem. But we'll talk about that in a separate video, because the graphics cards is the most important thing. While you're struggling to look for them and get them, it's really going to hinder you and waste a lot of your time. That's all I'm finding personally. So until I can find a massive stack of GPUs to sort of last me for a few months to flip PCs, that's only then will I sort of start to really ramp up the flipping again. Anyway, I'll catch you guys in another tech video very soon. And if you stayed this far and you're enjoying that Tech Yes content, then be sure to hit that sub button, ring that bell, and I will catch you guys in another one very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.